A royal insider has claimed that Prince William is already making plans for the future monarchy and maybe looking to revamp the list of working royals.
King Charles is said to want a slimmed-down monarchy with fewer royals doing more of the work. Harry and Meghan's departure helps achieve that, but it also means there's more pressure on William and Kate to fly the family flag.
Just moments ago, the royal family released an emotional update that has the entire nation holding its breath. Prince William, the future king and beloved face of modern royalty, is now at the center of deeply personal news that's left both the palace and the public shaken. Sources close to Kensington Palace reveal the update touches on William's health, responsibilities, and the immense pressure he's facing behind closed doors. But what exactly happened to the prince? And how will this revelation change the royal family's future? The tragedy that stopped Britain. The storm that rolled across England that evening felt almost unnatural. Angry winds whipping through the countryside, thunder cracking like the sky itself was splitting apart. Inside Windsor Castle, the royal family gathered for dinner, unaware that within minutes, their world would tilt into chaos. Silverware clinked softly, candles flickered, and the weight of centuries of tradition hung in the air. But at 6:47 p.m., everything changed. Somewhere high above the Lake District, a royal helicopter carrying Prince William vanished from radar. A single green blip blinked once, then disappeared. The pilot's last words were drowned in static, half-finished, interrupted by a burst of thunder. Locals later said the sky lit up like fire. Some spoke of flames streaking through the clouds before silence claimed the valley once more. In Windsor, the first call came quietly. A nervous aide rushed through the dining hall, pale-faced, whispering to a senior official. Seconds later, the room erupted into confusion. "Your Majesty," came the trembling voice, "we've lost contact with the prince." King Charles froze, his fork clattering onto his plate. The color drained from his face as he steadied himself against the table. His lips moved slowly before the words finally escaped. "Not my son. Not again." The air in the room thickened, time itself seeming to hold its breath. From that moment, protocol evaporated. Aides shouted orders into phones, couriers ran through corridors, and helicopters were scrambled toward Cumbria. By nightfall, search teams were combing the hills near Ulaw in brutal weather. Rain poured. Lightning flashed across the ridges, and through the chaos they found pieces of twisted metal scattered like broken bones. The storm refused to let up, as if nature itself was mourning. Back in Windsor, the palace descended into a different kind of storm. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, received the call in her private sitting room. For a moment, she didn't understand. Then the words sank in, and the sound that escaped her lips silenced the entire wing. It wasn't the poised composure of royalty, it was the raw cry of a wife and mother. The staff stood frozen. One aide dropped her phone and whispered a prayer. Outside the palace walls, the news spread like wildfire. Reporters scrambled for confirmation. Networks broke into their broadcasts, and by 8 p.m., the story had reached every corner of Britain. Crowds began to gather outside Buckingham Palace, clutching umbrellas and candles, faces lit by worry. For a nation still haunted by memories of Diana, it was a wound reopened. Through the downpour, a royal convoy sped toward London. Blue lights flashed against the wet pavement, sirens echoing down empty streets. Inside, Catherine sat motionless, her hands locked together, whispering William's name again and again, as if saying it could hold him to life. When she arrived at the hospital, cameras were already flashing. She stepped out, drenched, her expression unreadable. For that brief second, the world didn't see a princess. They saw a woman on the brink of heartbreak. Inside the emergency ward, chaos reigned. Doctors called out commands, machines beeped in frantic rhythm, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with fear. Catherine was led to his side. Prince William was alive, but barely. His face was pale beneath the glow of monitors, wires crisscrossing his chest, machines breathing for him. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, gripping his hand tightly. "Stay with me," she whispered through tears, her voice breaking with every syllable. King Charles entered silently moments later, his shoulders hunched beneath invisible weight. In his hand, he clutched a small rosary that once belonged to his late mother, the Queen. For all his power, he looked utterly powerless. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, thunder rolling like the beat of a broken heart. Each flicker on the monitor was a fragile defiance of fate. Catherine refused to leave, her gaze fixed on his face, her fingers still entwined with his. Every minute stretched longer than the last. Then, around 2 a.m., quiet murmurs rippled among the doctors. Something had been found at the crash site, something that didn't fit. The information was passed discreetly to a senior investigator, and whispers began to spread. The wreckage wasn't consistent with a normal crash, they said. Some claimed a piece of equipment didn't belong to the helicopter model. Others hinted at missing communication records from the final moments of flight. The palace refused to comment. Officials urged calm. But by dawn, the theories had already begun, speculation swirling like the very storm that started it all. Was it merely an accident caused by brutal weather, or was there more beneath the surface? Could this have been something darker, tied to whispers of internal royal tension or political unease? No one knew. Or perhaps no one was willing to say. As the first light of morning broke through the clouds, Catherine sat in the same chair beside his bed, her eyes red but unblinking. William's chest rose and fell weakly under the machines. She whispered his name one last time, the words barely audible. Outside, Windsor remained eerily silent. Flags hung limp against the cold wind, and the palace gates were crowded with flowers and prayers. Britain stood still, holding its breath, waiting for news that might never come. That night, something changed forever. Not just for the royal family, but for the entire nation. Because in those dark hours between thunder and dawn, the illusion of royal perfection cracked, and behind it was only fear, love, and the haunting question that no one dared ask aloud. What really happens when the royal facade shatters and fear takes the throne? Let's dive into the moment that turned quiet luxury into chilling uncertainty. The day the crown trembled, the first light of morning did not bring peace. It brought fear. The world woke to a single sentence that shattered sleep and silence alike. The Prince of Wales remains in critical condition following a helicopter incident in Cumbria. No details. No explanations. Just those chilling words, broadcast across every channel, echoing through every home. London stood still. In the streets, strangers gathered with candles and tears. Rain soaked the pavements as flowers began to pile up in front of Buckingham Palace, the petals glistening in the faint glow of flickering candles. Television screens everywhere replayed the same haunting images: the wreckage, the royal crest, the gates of the hospital. Reporters spoke in hushed tones, their voices trembling like the nation they were speaking to. Across oceans, world leaders sent messages of concern, and social media drowned in grief. For many, it felt like a cruel déjà vu, a wound ripped open from 1997, when the world mourned Princess Diana. Once again, Britain was holding its breath for a royal life hanging in the balance. Inside the hospital, Catherine stood at the window, her face pale against the dull gray light. Outside, thousands of supporters waited, holding signs that read, "Stay strong, William." Her lips moved faintly. "He will," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed the storm inside her. But even as the world prayed for healing, whispers began to twist through the palace corridors. What if it hadn't been an accident? It started quietly, with a single note in a classified security report. Flight data shows irregularities. At first, few paid attention, but when Princess Anne saw it, she demanded answers. "Mechanical failures don't just vanish from radar," she said sharply during a private meeting. "Something else happened up there." Her words hung heavy in the air. Hours later, military experts confirmed what everyone feared to believe. The helicopter's navigation systems had been tampered with. Someone had interfered with it. Whether from inside or outside, no one yet knew. King Charles received the report in his private study. His hands trembled as he turned each page. Threats, rivals, family legacy, the thoughts swirled through his mind like a storm. Finally, he shut the folder and murmured, "Keep this contained." But secrets, especially royal ones, rarely stay buried. Across the Atlantic in California, Prince Harry received the call. Those same words that once ended his childhood now echoed through his adult life. "There's been an accident." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, he told Meghan, "It's happening again." By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Royal crash mystery. Sabotage not ruled out. The palace had lost control of the story, and what began as tragedy was now spiraling into suspicion. Behind closed doors, tempers flared. Some advisors urged transparency. Others warned that the truth might unravel the very institution they were sworn to protect. King Charles clung to silence, determined to keep the investigation hidden from public view. But Princess Anne was relentless. She confronted him in the palace library, her voice sharp with frustration. "You can't silence a storm, Charles," she said. "If you try, it will destroy us." He turned away, eyes glistening. "You think I don't know that?" he whispered. "You think I haven't buried enough?" The walls of Buckingham Palace, once symbols of endurance, now seemed to vibrate with unease. The monarchy, steeped in centuries of tradition, was bleeding from within. Every whispered conversation ended in suspicion. Every silence felt dangerous. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Catherine refused to leave William's side. The rhythmic hum of the machines became the only sound in the room. She sat beside him, her fingers wrapped around his unmoving hand. "You'll wake up," she murmured, tears falling softly. "And when you do, I'll tell you everything they tried to hide." Outside, dawn began to rise, painting the London skyline in shades of gold and sorrow. The storm had passed, but its shadow remained. Behind sealed reports and guarded faces lay a truth too dark to name, one that could change the future of the crown forever. King Charles knew it. Princess Anne knew it. And somewhere deep in the palace, someone else knew it too. Someone who wanted that truth to stay buried. But whispers, like secrets, have a way of escaping. And as the world prayed for the prince's recovery, one question echoed through every corner of Britain. Was this truly an accident or the beginning of something far more dangerous for the House of Windsor? Could this so-called accident be the spark that threatens to unravel Buckingham Palace's deepest secrets? Let's dive into the mystery shaking the House of Windsor. The crown in the shadows. Behind the towering gates of Buckingham Palace, where silence often hides the truth, whispers began to spread like wildfire. The official story said it was a tragic accident. But as dawn crept across London, that version began to crack. Investigators had a different word for what happened over the Lake District: interference. And while Britain tried to hold on to hope, the royal family braced for a revelation that could shake the monarchy to its very core. In those early hours, the palace was quiet. Too quiet. Outside, crowds gathered in the drizzle, their eyes fixed on the grand doors that had not opened in days. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with unanswered questions. What really happened in the skies that night? Was it a simple malfunction, or something far more sinister? As the sun rose over the Thames, a flicker of hope finally broke through the gloom. The hospital released a statement that sent shockwaves across the world. The Prince of Wales has shown small but promising signs of improvement. For the first time since the crash, the sound outside Buckingham Palace changed. Tears turned into gasps of relief. Applause rippled through the crowd as if the entire nation exhaled at once. A little girl, clutching a hand-drawn sign, whispered softly, "He's waking up." It was as though the whole country had been holding its breath, and now, just maybe, the nightmare was beginning to lift. Inside the hospital, Catherine sat by her husband's bedside, her eyes red and swollen from sleepless nights. She hadn't eaten, barely spoken, and refused to leave his side. When the nurse entered the room that morning, with a faint smile, Catherine's heart nearly stopped. Then came the words she had prayed for. "There's movement." Her forehead fell against William's hand as she whispered, "You're still here. You're still mine." But while hope flickered in that hospital room, another storm was brewing behind palace doors. At precisely 9:17 a.m., a private meeting was held inside Windsor's most secure conference room. King Charles, Queen Camilla, and Princess Anne sat in tense silence as the lead investigator entered, holding a folder stamped "Classified Level 1." When he spoke, his tone was grave. "There was external interference," he said. "Someone wanted that helicopter to fall." The words froze the room. Camilla gasped. Anne's hands trembled. Charles went pale, gripping the table for balance. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. The investigator nodded. "Beyond any doubt, sir." A heavy silence followed. Then, for the first time in years, the king's composure shattered. He slammed his fist on the table. "Then find them," he said, voice shaking with fury. "I don't care how far you have to go. Find them!" Camilla reached for his arm, her voice trembling. "And when the world finds out, Charles? What happens then?" He looked at her, his face lined with exhaustion. "Then they'll know," he whispered, "that even the crown is not safe from the shadows." At that same moment, across the city, a nurse inside the hospital gasped. William's finger twitched. A small movement, almost unnoticeable, but it was enough. Catherine felt it too, a faint pressure against her palm. Her breath caught in her throat. "William," she whispered, tears spilling freely. "If you can hear me, don't stop." Doctors rushed in, monitors flickering to life. One nurse leaned over. "Reflex movement," she murmured. "He's responding." And in that fragile moment, hope returned to Britain. Within hours, the news broke. Prince William shows first signs of consciousness. Crowds outside the hospital erupted in cheers. Church bells rang across London. In New York, Times Square screens flashed with messages of support. In Sydney, people gathered for sunrise vigils. In Nairobi, a local choir sang "God Save the King." Even Prince Harry, who had stayed silent since the crash, was seen quietly arriving at St. Paul's Cathedral. He didn't speak to cameras, but the look in his eyes said everything: worry, regret, and something that hadn't been seen between the brothers in years: unity. When Catherine finally stepped outside the hospital, her face pale but composed, the world watched in silence. "We are overwhelmed by your love," she said softly. "Please keep praying. He is strong, and I know he will come back to us." The clip went viral within minutes. Not because she was royal, but because she was real. Her voice carried the weight of a wife's love, a mother's fear, and a nation's hope. But even as the bells of celebration echoed across the country, the palace remained shrouded in unease. The investigation was far from over, and the deeper the team dug, the darker the picture became. There were missing logs, unexplained signal drops, and one unanswered question that haunted every corridor of Buckingham Palace. If someone truly wanted the helicopter to fall, who could be powerful enough to make it happen? For now, Britain celebrated William's fight for life. But behind the walls of the monarchy, one truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The real storm had only just begun. But what if the storm-shaking Buckingham Palace wasn't outside at all? Let's dive into the night that changed everything inside the royal walls forever. The night truth knocked on Buckingham's door. The air inside Buckingham Palace that night felt heavier than ever before. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the tall windows. But inside the king's private chamber, a different kind of storm was brewing. Only 4 people were present: King Charles, Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, and the chief investigator leading the inquiry that had consumed the monarchy for weeks. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp that cast long shadows across the polished oak table where a thick, sealed envelope waited. Inside that envelope lay the final report, the truth behind the helicopter crash that had nearly claimed Prince William's life. When the seal broke, the air seemed to stop moving. Pages turned slowly, the silence growing colder with every word read. Then came the line that made everyone freeze. The helicopter's navigation system had not failed. It had been tampered with. An external signal had overridden its controls mid-flight, redirecting its course moments before it disappeared from radar. There was no mechanical error, no accident of weather. It was deliberate, precise, and terrifyingly calculated. Charles stared at the evidence for what felt like an eternity. "So it wasn't an accident," he finally said, his voice breaking the silence. The investigator's answer was steady, but grim. "No, Your Majesty." It was a message. Anne's fist tightened at her sides. "A message from who?" she demanded. No one spoke. Even the investigator, who had spent weeks tracing encrypted data, had no answer. The report ended where it began, with uncertainty. But there was one truth no one in that room could ignore. Someone, somewhere, had wanted to send a warning. King Charles closed the file slowly. "The crown survives," he whispered, staring at the flickering lamp. "But it bleeds." His words hung in the air like an echo from another time, a reminder that behind every symbol of power lies the fragility of human life. Down the hall, in a quiet hospital room bathed in pale light, Catherine sat beside William's bed. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the silence. She had barely moved for days, her fingers wrapped around his motionless hand, whispering prayers between breaths. Then suddenly, something shifted. A small twitch beneath her fingertips. Then another. The monitors flickered. The doctor froze mid-step. And before anyone could speak, William's eyes fluttered open. Unfocused at first, then slowly finding hers. Catherine gasped, tears spilling down her face. "You're not home yet," she whispered softly, brushing his hair from his forehead, "but you will be soon." William didn't speak, but a single tear rolled down his cheek, glistening under the sterile light. It was enough. Enough to tell her that he remembered, enough to tell her that he was still there. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. Across Britain, church bells rang through the night. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace waving flags, crying, praying. The words, "He woke up," trended across every screen on Earth. For a brief, shining moment, the monarchy, fractured, criticized, questioned, felt united again. Later that night, as the crowds outside sang the national anthem, another figure arrived quietly at the hospital, Prince Harry. No cameras followed him. No headlines announced his visit. He simply walked down the same corridor where the echoes of old grief still lingered, the same place that had changed his life decades ago. When he entered the room, Catherine looked up but said nothing. William was asleep again, his face pale but peaceful. Harry approached quietly, placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, and for the first time in years, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like forgiveness, unspoken but deeply understood. By dawn, the family had gathered together, side by side. The years of cold stares and strained smiles seemed to fade into the background. Whatever had divided them was suddenly smaller than the relief of one simple truth. William was alive. Weeks later, once the prince regained enough strength to speak, the palace released a short official statement. It didn't mention sabotage. It didn't name anyone responsible. It simply read, "We are deeply grateful for the miracle of life and for the love that carried us through the darkest of nights." But behind palace walls, whispers continued. Who could have interfered with a royal flight? How could such an operation happen under the radar? Some said it was a hacker's warning. Others believed it was an inside job meant to shake the throne. The truth, for now, remained buried in silence, just like the rain-soaked wreckage that had sparked the world's most haunting royal mystery. Yet as William slowly recovered, one thought echoed through every corner of the monarchy. The skies above Britain had changed forever. And somewhere out there, the one who tampered with them was still watching. Some say Britain would never be the same again. But what truly unfolded before Catherine's emotional return to the spotlight? Let's dive into the moment that changed everything. The day Britain breathed. Again, the morning light spilled gently over London as Catherine pushed the wheelchair through the hospital's glass doors. The crowd outside erupted in applause, their cheers echoing off the walls like a wave of relief. William lifted his hand weakly to acknowledge them, his face pale but calm. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and yet, in that chaos, Catherine's composure never faltered. She smiled softly, but her eyes told a deeper story. One of sleepless nights, whispered prayers, and the quiet terror of almost losing everything. When asked how she felt, her answer was simple. The crown has faced many storms. This one reminded us why we endure, because we face them together. Those few words struck a chord that rippled across Britain. It wasn't the voice of a princess speaking from privilege. It was the voice of a woman who had seen the edge of despair and found her way back. Later that evening, the palace chapel glowed in candlelight. There were no crowns, no cameras, only family. The silence carried the weight of what they had almost lost. Prince Andrew sat quietly in a corner, his head bowed. Across from him, King Charles reached out to his sons. When William looked up, Charles's eyes filled with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking, "and I won't make that mistake again." It was a moment stripped of protocol, just a father's plea in the aftermath of fear. The weeks that followed were a slow, fragile return to normalcy. Inside Buckingham Palace, the routine resumed: meetings, official briefings, polite smiles. But behind every door, there was a quiet understanding that something had shifted forever. The crash had not just tested the future king's strength. It had forced the entire family to confront their humanity. One night, long after the palace had gone still, Catherine stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer like distant stars. The reflection of the crown on the table beside her caught her eye, and she understood something she hadn't before. The monarchy wasn't about jewels, palaces, or pageantry. It was about survival, about the strength to rise after every fall, to rebuild after every break. The true weight of the crown, she realized, wasn't measured in gold, but in resilience. When April came, the royal balcony once again became the heart of a nation's emotion. Crowds flooded the mall, flags waved, and voices rose in joy as William stepped forward for the first time since the accident. Catherine stood beside him, their fingers entwined, while King Charles watched with pride and tears he didn't try to hide. 3 generations of the monarchy, grandfather, father, and future king, stood beneath the fluttering Union Jack, not as distant figures, but as survivors. For a brief golden moment, the wind seemed to shift. It carried not grief this time, but gratitude. The same storm that once nearly tore their lives apart had somehow drawn them closer, to each other and to the people watching below. The cameras captured it all. The way William smiled faintly at his wife. The way Catherine leaned close as if steadying him. The way Charles's hand trembled against the balcony rail. It wasn't a performance. It was proof that even those born into power are not spared from pain. But they can, like anyone else, learn to heal. And as the crowd roared, a thought lingered across Britain that perhaps this was what monarchy truly meant in the modern age. Not perfection, but persistence. Not distance, but connection. Because in the end, the crown isn't just metal and jewels. It's the pulse of those who wear it. It's hearts that keep beating even when the world expects them to break. It's the quiet courage of a woman who refused to give up, a father who learned to forgive, and a nation that chose hope over sorrow. And somewhere, beyond the applause and headlines, Catherine's words still echoed softly, reminding everyone that miracles aren't made by crowns or titles. They're made by people who, despite everything, choose to rise again. So, what do you think really lies behind this emotional update about Prince William? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.